This is going to be a very different session than Sidi Ibrahim's session. I've kind of prepared a presentation for the first part, and then I just wanted to take a little break, and then the second part will be a more interactive session based on the almost technical discussion I have in the first part. So I'm just going to read my paper, but if you're falling asleep or if it just doesn't make sense, stick your hand up, and that will give me a kind of signal that I need to pause and that I'm going too fast or losing you. So I don't want to lose you. So I'm just going to bash on into my introduction. So this talk on the topic of Muru'a, and I put Muru'a first, not Futuwwa, Muru'a and Futuwwa, and I'm going to explain what those are later on. We'll look at the question of secondary education, especially the education of young men. So this is what we're looking at. This is about the upbringing of young men. In doing so, we will look radically through the lens of Islam at humanity beyond the present postmodern society, and hopefully through the wisdom and guidance of Quran, the prophetic Sunnah, and the unfolding history of our Ummah, we will establish a methodology and an outline of practice that will help effect a cure. I say cure because, using sweeping headlines, I would contest that for mankind and the planet in its stewardship, we could diagnose modernity as a chronic illness and post-modernity as terminal. And in the context of education, that secondary education is a social experiment that has failed, which many of you who might have heard me say that before. So I hope, therefore, in the next hour and a half to give substance to this melodramatic assertion through a Quranic framework of understanding of human society, recognizing that education is the process by which a society perpetuates and develops its shape. Every society has educational processes. The modern and now postmodern state, which has evolved incrementally in the past 5 centuries through an interlinked set of drivers, which include, among others, scientific materialism, usurious finance, and exponential statism and its galloping bureaucracy, has formalized education to be universal, compulsory state education. This compulsory state education in the United Kingdom, and it is state, or we could say statist education, whether delivered by the public or private sector, has gradually increased the school leaving age from 10 in 1880. So in 1880, the school leaving age was 10 years old. That's only 135 years ago, a blink of an eye in the span of history. And it went to 11 in 1893, to 14 in 1918, to 15 in 1944, to 16 in 1973, and effectively now it's 18. So you're compulsorily educated by the state until the age of 18. Common understanding, informed as it unconsciously is by applied Darwinian models of social evolution, would see this intensification of universal state education as evidence of social progress. And to question its benefit to humanity in any way would be seen by the majority of the public, including the Muslim public, as being tantamount to madness and a willful return to some politically incorrect and largely mythic bad old days. However, our criteria as Muslims should be different. Firstly, we have a long view perspective why there were dark days in industrializing 19th century Britain, and dark days there certainly were. Secondly, our concern is not with the quality of the times per se, but with the quality of the people. So since Islam is the transaction with the real, the haqq, which is concerned with people becoming the best they can be, good people at bad times would be preferable to us than bad people at good times, which of course means that we have to evaluate what is good and what is bad in social terms, because in spite of this semantic juggling, we all intuitively know good times and good people go together. So I mean, we say we want good, but actually they have to go together. So my positing that we would be preferable for us to have good people at bad times is meaningless. Thus we know and accept implicitly as Muslims that not only were the companions, and by extension the Muslim Ummah as a whole, the best nation brought out for mankind, as is mentioned in Surah Ali Imran, but that Medina was the best society that has ever existed, and they didn't have running water or even schools. This then is the core matter of this talk. What makes a society good? And in the way that word, we have to look at it. Good for what? And how are the best human beings nurtured? So since my analysis is a sociological approach, we must go back to the master. Indeed, many regard him as the creator of sociology, Ibn Khaldun. May Allah reward him. So the first part of my talk is an exposition of Ibn Khaldun's theory of society. I will then pause and get feedback on this framework of understanding, and then in the second part of the session I will look at the education of young men in the light of this framework, exploring particularly the transformation of tribal Muru'a into Islamic Futuwwa. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Hujurat, O mankind, we have created you from a male and female and made you into peoples, into shu'uban and tribes, qaba'il. So these two words, shu'uban wa qaba'il, and we'll come back to that later on, so that you might come to know each other, to have recognition, liyata'arafun. The noblest in Allah's sight is the one with the most taqwa. Allah is all-knowing, all-aware. So this ayat delineates the process of how society coheres together organically from the cellular level of the couple to the formation of organs and limbs. The Prophet ﷺ said that his ummah, his community, was like a single body. Ibn Khaldun, drawing on Aristotle, posits that man is defined by sociability, by politicalness, from the Greek root polis, the city and its hinterland, and that human social organization is something necessary by man's primal nature, by his fitra. He divides sociability, this being part of between the Bedouin, people of the hinterland and the wild places, and the sedentary, essentially meaning city dweller. Both Bedouins and sedentary people are natural fitri groups. So it isn't an idea that there's some natural countries. The city is an organic, natural environment for the human being. Fitra encompasses a range of meanings around the concept of nature and naturalness. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said in the well-known hadith, everybody knows, every child is born on the fitra, al-fitra, then his parents make him a Jew, a Christian or a Magian, just as the animal produces its baby with perfect limbs. Do you see any deficiency in its shape? Islam is the deen that keeps mankind in touch with this pure and unconditioned nature, and it is often referred to as Deen al-Fitra. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Rum, so set your face firmly towards the deen as a pure believer, as a Hanif. Allah's pattern, Allah's fitra on which He has made mankind. So we can view the deen of Islam as a seed, complete in its potential, which needs to be planted in soil into a growth culture, and the Quranic terminology for this is a millah. So when we have the translations of Quran, often they have the word deen and the word millah, both translated as religion, but there is a very distinct difference between the meaning, and bringing out that meaning is a very important thing for us in looking at things in this sociological way. If the seed, for instance, is cultivated in the dominant capitalist culture, the millat al-kufr, we could say, with its reduction of the human being to producer and consumer, it will produce a sickly plant that reflects the social and individual diseases of this culture, and will not have the regenerative energy to address the pressing issues of our times. We witness the failure and intellectual and spiritual bankruptcy of such phenomena of modernity as Islamic banking, the Islamic State, and most crucially, in the context of this weekend's event, Islamic education. Please forgive me for repeating things that have already been said. The exemplar of fitra for the modern human being, for the modern man, is Ibrahim, alayhi salam, the prophet referred to as the Hanif, who emerged in the cradle of civilization in Mesopotamia, where man first began to live in cities in relation to an agrarian and pastoral hinterland and an outlying wilderness. Allah constantly refers in Quran to the pattern of social conditioning and its worldview, this growth medium, the millah of Ibrahim the Hanif, Ibrahim al-Hanif, as the appropriate one for mankind. And it is notable that Allah does not associate the term millah with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Examining the life of Ibrahim alayhi salam, we can see that he lived in dynamic interaction between the settled and the wild places, and that he exemplifies the mutual reinvigoration of this relationship. So we're talking about a relationship between what Ibn Khaldun terms as a technical term, Bedu. Don't get too kind of concerned. Bedu is beyond what the specific meaning of Bedu and of the Hadari, what we are calling sedentary in English. So the Arabic term is Hadari. The picture of Ibrahim in which the city, and we could call it the polis, is a new but natural environment with its ecological functions of market, administrative centre, and ritual gathering place, a place of ritual worship, rests on the previous fitra of the ancients, the Adamic fitra, which subsists in the pattern of life of the people of the wild places, which in sort of anthropological terms we'd call the hunter-gatherers, people who live with a direct relationship to Allah's creation. It is interesting to note from a meta-historical overview that the ritual worship aspect of the city, a place where people go to worship, a site where worship existed in the ancient pattern. And that Mecca was established as a place of worship and pilgrimage by Adam. And it is indeed the most ancient city, the Al-Atiq, or the al-Qura, as Mecca is referred to. Indeed, it is the settlement of people around sacred sites on a permanent basis that stimulated the need for agriculture and pastoralism. It wasn't, people would say they invented kind of agriculture and then they started to be in cities. It wasn't like that. It was people settled around these sites of worship, and because they wanted to be there the whole time, agriculture and the pastoralism appeared to them out of their interaction. It had to be. It had to. So it stimulated their discovery of it. It is also pertinent that Ibrahim was not sent as the prophet at the beginning of this process. So he wasn't the prophet that was sent to establish a pattern, but when the pattern of this kind of settled worship and settlement had been corrupted by the introduction of idol worship. So we all know the story of Sayyidina Ibrahim in the Quran and how he's destroys the idols. But in this context, it's interesting to see that the corruption of the Adamic fitra, the Adamic dispensation, was the reduction of worship of Allah to nature worship, so that the pure deen is reduced to shamanism in its variety of forms. So you still see in the kind of the traces of that hunter-gatherer way of life, that religion has become shamanistic. It's become worship and manipulation of natural forces. And that was also the religion of the ancient Arab people. So, which, anyway, I'll bash on. So, and the corruption of modern religion is the erecting and worship of idols in all their forms, as Allah in Surah Al-Safat reports Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam as saying, "What? Do you worship what you have created with your own hands?" We will return to Sayyidina Ibrahim in depth in the second part of this course. So we've established Ibrahim's relationship with the fitra. To return to Ibn Khaldun's analysis, he posits the balance between the city as the center of order and governance, but which tends to stasis, stagnation and corruption, and the regenerative influx of fresh energy from the edges as the core mechanism of social regeneration and dynamism. Ibn Khaldun noticed that the incomers from the wild places, the Bedu, we put a technical term for them, had nobleness of character and group loyalty, which he called asabiya. So he defines a technical term of sociability as asabiya, that gave them the energy and focus to take leadership and reinvigorate the centre and restore just governance. We can explore this dynamism between the two modes of sociability and relate them to the Quranic terminology of Qaba'il and Shu'ub, and Ibn Khaldun's differentiation between Bedu and Hadari, by looking at the work of the German sociologist Ferdinand Tönnies. He, like Ibn Khaldun, made a bipartite division of societies, delineating social modes he characterized as Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft. We've got another European intellectual kind of having a useful terminology. So, in brief, we could designate Gemeinschaft as a community bound together by direct relationships. In such societies, there is seldom a need to enforce indirect social control due to a direct sense of loyalty and individual feels for Gemeinschaft. So obviously, the family and the kind of tribe are the kind of the thing that you see immediately for that. But it's very important to realize that the origin of the tribe is not the family. Tribes emerged by leadership. Leadership would, and so you would get a cluster of people that become tribal, but by its emergence of leadership, that kind of, so it's not they're not all just related to each other. So and then we could characterize Gemeinschaft as a society that coheres. This direct face-to-face relationship. It has this thing called asabiya. It has the group loyalty. It has the energy created by that trust and kind of affirmation of the immediate group. And we could use the Quranic terminology Qaba'il for that. In contrast, Gesellschaft, often characterized as civil society, describes all of the associations in which for the one person and a larger group never takes precedence over the individual's self-interest. And these associations lack the same level of shared mores. I'm now actually quoting from Wikipedia, I'm afraid. Gesellschaft is maintained through individuals acting in their own self-interest. A modern business is a good example of Gesellschaft. I'll just skip over that Wikipedia talk and basically say, in summary, Gesellschaft could be characterized as a society that coheres through people being citizens of a polity, being through an idea. Gesell, in that sense, means what's the word Gesell mean in German? Just means idea, doesn't it? Ibrahim?
I think it means structure or organisation.
Okay.
In Tony's sense of Gesellschaft, it's a formally structured organisation.
Yeah. But whereas the Gemeinschaft is this direct face-to-face relationship, everybody has a kind of relationship to everybody knows each other. It's kind of has this kind of it's tied to by an asabiya, which is kind of a sense of your immediate tie to somebody. There's an idea about society. The Islamic polity, the Medina of the Prophet and his companions, however, cannot be described as either of these models. Rather, it exists on the barzakh, on the kind of the interspace or overlap between the two. On the one hand, it is a Gemeinschaft in which that asabiya has been purified by ikhwa, by brotherhood, and by sohbah, by keeping company with the Prophet. So, as we said, it's the ummah has a cellular level by which the people who are a jama have immediate kind of relationship to each other, and that is your core experience of being a Muslim, is within community. So we had the talk that Hajj Osman gave earlier about the importance of the community. But that tendency of the group to become a tribe is purified by the other aspect of the Gesellschaft. So the sense of the Muslims being an ummah, a wider brotherhood that's beyond your Jama'ah, is absolutely part. So the tension is held between the two. It's neither a pure Gemeinschaft nor is it a pure Gesellschaft, but the dynamic tension holding those two together is what gives it the vitality. And I remind the audience again of the ayat in Surah Al-Hujurat. O mankind, we have created you from male and female and made you into tribes and kaba'il, to shu'ub and kaba'il, so that you may have mutual recognition and affirmation of one another. When the asabiya of the Bedu social model is not purified, society devolves into savagery. When civil society has no channels of asabiya, has no to irrigate it, it devolves into statism, or even beyond the statism, into anarchy that is the same as savagery. A spectrum of possibilities exists between these extremes. So Ibn Khaldun sets up this kind of understanding that there is a kind of dynamism between these two things, and that Islam is, in its purity, emerges from a transition from one state to the other. So Medina, as the kind of polity, the source polity for mankind, or the blueprint for an illuminated city, as it has been described by Sheikh Abdul Qadir Sufi, exists in a moment of transition from the one mode of sociability to the other, and the catalyst of change and transformation is the presence and leadership and dawah of the Prophet Muhammad and his energized, that is, energized by him, companions, who form what Ibn Khaldun terms a dynasty or power group. So he starts to use some terms that we can use in our discourse, but remembering that, in the kind of the potential of using them as technical terms, we have to make the broadest understanding of them. So dawah is a technical term for Ibn Khaldun. It is that obviously the purest dawah is the dawah to Islam, but any group always has an aspect of it that it's calling to something. And dynasty, is a group who take power, and that can take many forms. So the technical terms that we'll come across, we've come across Bedu, we've come across Hadari, the sedentary, we've come across Asabiya, we've come across now Dawah, and we'll see some other ones like fortitude, superiority, and kingship in the unfolding of this discourse. As technical terms, we have to give them flexibility of understanding and application, using them to create what I would call a neo-Khaldunian Muslim sociology. Sheikh Abdul Qadir as-Sufi has started on this in his seminal book, The Time of the Bedouin. I urge all of you to read The Time of the Bedouin. It has a lot of mileage. According to Ibn Khaldun, dynasties rise and fall on a cyclical basis from emergence on the periphery to a forceful occupation of the center, which dissipates until the dynasty is replaced by a new one emerging from a new periphery. He analyzes this process minutely, but because of time constraint, I won't go into this aspect in detail. But back to our examination of the rise of Islam in Medina and then in other places. We can see that the phenomenon of transitional, transformative, primal Islam and its reoccurring manifestations can be seen to be like a seed that is planted. The plant grows and flourishes for its appointed time, and then it withers and dies, although its dead form may subsist for a while. Its seeds, however, are blown by the wind, and some find fertile soil. In a complementary organic picture, it has been noted by Richard Bulliett in his View from the Edge, which is a book, if you can get hold of it, I also really recommend, how the energizing creative impulse of the advance of the Muslim Ummah on its periphery revitalizes the center. He says that the where Islam happens in this dynamic form is where questions are asked. And he said the questions are asked not at the center, but where the kind of, where new ground is being made. So where people have to say, oh, what is it, to be a Muslim? What is it? How do we put this into practice? So in that sense, we see it witness in our own lives that Islam on our peripheries here in the United Kingdom is much more dynamic than it is in kind of the heartlands of Islam, where. But as Ibn Khaldun notes, every dynasty or locus of power has a limit to its power of expansion, although the dawah, the call to the deen, has a unique potentizing transformational quality which broadens and deepens the impact of the dynasty's expansion. So when he's talking about he's mainly talking about the Muslim Ummah, but you can look at every kind of society through his framework of understanding. In this context, he analyzes the situation of the Arabs at the beginning of Islam. And I think this is really important to get a taste of this. So I please excuse me now. This from I made a kind of a précis of a certain section of Ibn Khaldun, but I think it kind of gives us a taste of something. He said, the number of Muslims who participated in the raid against Tabuk the Prophet's last raid was 110,000, consisting of Mudar, which means the people from North Arabia, and the Qahtan, the people from South Arabia, horsemen and foot soldiers. That number was augmented by those who became Muslims after the raid and down to the time of the Prophet's death, when all these people then set out to seek for themselves the royal authority, this kind of the dominion, the mulk. I'm not too sure what the precise Arabic term is here, held by other nations. There was no protection against them or refuge. That's actually because he's saying, as a reservoir of potentiality, the Arabs were a great reservoir. There were many, 100, in 110 people, with that focus and with that potentized, were irresistible. They were allowed to take possession of the realms of the Persians and the Byzantines, who were the greatest dynasties in the world at that time, as well as the realms of the Turks in the east, of the European Christians and Berbers in the west, in the Maghrib, and of the Goths in Spain. They went from the Hijaz to Assus in the far west, and from the Yemen to the Turks in the furthest north. But no further conquests could be made by them, and the Muslim empire reached its farthest extension at that time. I mean, there are later extensions, but that initial expansion at the hands of the Arabs reached its kind of natural limits. And those borders were not passed, but the dynasty, i.e. this first Arab dynasty, which you can really say was the time of the Umayyads, and receded from them until Allah permitted it to be destroyed. The situation of later dynasties was the same. Each dynasty depended on the numerical strength of its supporters. When its numbers were exhausted through expansion, no further conquest or extension of power was possible. This is how Allah proceeds with his creatures. The greatness of a dynasty, the extent of its territory, and the length of its duration depend upon the numerical strength of its supporters. The reason for this is that royal authority, that command, exists only through through asabiyah. Representatives of this asabiyah are the militiamen, are the mujahideen, are the people who who settle in the provinces and territories of the dynasty and are spread over them. It's their royal. The royal authority, therefore, is wider. An example of this was a Muslim dynasty when Allah united the power of the Arabs in Islam. I'm just going to keep an idea on my time. So we can also apply this analysis to the revival of and the extension of Islam by other groups, by the Ottomans, by the Mughals. The Mughals and the Ottomans are from this reservoir of the Turkish peoples. So the Turkic peoples were like a reservoir of potentiality, as were the kind of the Arabs, and they were a very great one. So their kind of extension reached to far into, became the Mughal Empire. It became the Timurids. It became the Seljuks. It became the Ottomans. It became the Safavids. So the Turkish expansion of Islam was great, and you also can see it in like a smaller scale, like in West Africa with the Fulani. I mean, the Fulani were the pastoral kind of nomadic people who created Islamic kingdoms across West Africa. We all know the one of Sheikh Uthman Dan Fodio, but there were also the kingdom of Samori and the Futa Jalan. There was many other realms of Islam created by those people. But we could also adapt it to the mercantile expansion of Islam in southern India, East Africa, and the Malay world. And it's a slightly different dynamic, but and we could also apply it on a micro level to reform groups within the Muslim Ummah. That there has to be the kind of the emergence of this of a potentized group. But looking at it, I think it's important to look at the source again. So it's absolutely central to the impact and application of this model to acknowledge the divine wisdom in locating the emergence of the Prophet Muhammad in Arabia, and to see that just as Allah had uniquely prepared the Arabic language as the vehicle for the revelation of Quran, He had uniquely chosen the Arab people and their culture as the social milieu for the living out of His final messenger's life, and the context of His final messenger establishing His Sunnah. And I now want to introduce the term Muru'a, because the ethic, the code of the Arab man was what we call Muru'a. There was another term which is ird. Is I correcting that, pronouncing that correctly, for the honour of women. So the women had their own honour code, but in terms of this kind of leadership and the Muru'a is the thing that we're looking at. So we're looking at the kind of how men transform themselves, and I will be looking then again at the education of young men. To elaborate on the metaphor we gave before of the Deen of Islam being a seed that requires being planted in an appropriate soil, the millet of fitra, we must appreciate that although the Arabs were jahil, they were fitri. John Bagot Glubb, the English soldier who created Jordan's Arab Legion and who lived with the Bedou Arabs and loved them, and whose son became Muslim, made an astute observation that perfectly sums up for me why Allah placed His Prophet amongst the fitri tribal environment of Arabia and not in the world empires of Rome, Persia or China that dominated the world of that time. He observes that if the Prophet had lived in any of those societies, the authorities would have dealt swiftly, ruthlessly and efficiently with him, eliminating him to protect their interests, but that even when the Arabs of Mecca, the Quraysh and their affiliates, did finally decide to assassinate the Prophet, they had to make the decision in the public arena of the Dar al-Nadwa, with the consultation of all the constituent elements of Meccan society, including the Prophet's own clan, the Banu Hashim. So of course, the Prophet ﷺ was immediately aware, of their plans, and he could just put into effect immediately his own plans for the Hijrah. So he was protected. Yes, there was discrimination against them, but there was kind of bad, but largely, they weren't as badly treated as they would have been had they been in Rome and being fed to the lions, basically. So and as we know, they became the companions who then became the kind of the light of the world. So they were they had eminent qualities. And we can also add to this how Abu Talib, as the leader of Banu Hashim, supported and protected his nephew, and how he and the rest of Banu Hashim, of course he wasn't Muslim, they suffered with the Prophet and the Muslims the boycott and the exclusion in Mecca. So to recapitulate, Ibn Khaldun posits that human social organization is something necessary by man's primal nature, by his fitra. He divides sociability between Bedu and Hadari, Bedu and sedentary, and both are natural groups. And then he goes into, I'm just going to do a little bit more of using Ibn Khaldun's own words. So he says, the Bedu adopt the natural manner of making a living, namely agriculture and animal husbandry. They restrict themselves to the necessary in food, clothing, and mode of dwelling. Bare necessities are prior to the conveniences and luxuries. The toughness of desert life precedes the softness of sedentary life. Urbanization, the Hadari is the goal of the Bedouin. The desert is the basis and reservoir of civilization and cities. And the Bedou are closer to being good than sedentary people, because sedentary people are much concerned with pleasures. Therefore their nafs are coloured with blameworthy and evil qualities. The Bedou may be as concerned with worldly affairs, but their concern only touches necessities and not luxuries. They are closer to the first natural state and can be more easily be cured than sedentary people. Bedouins are more disposed to courage than sedentary people, who have become used to laziness and ease. The sedentary entrust the defence of their property and their lives to the ruler and to the militia and the fortifications that protect them. We just keep on transposing what he's saying and putting it into our own context, and it will take a life on of itself. So he's saying, talking about the kind of the sedentary people. They are carefree and trusting and have ceased to carry weapons. They have become like women and children who depend upon the master of the house. The Bedou live alone in the country, remote from militias. They provide their own defence and do not rely on others. They always carry weapons. And then he uses this term fortitude. Fortitude has become a character of theirs, and their nature is to be courageous. And he goes on talking about their self-reliance, and if, however, and he talks about the human situation and said, if, however, the domination with its laws and brute force and intimidation breaks their fortitude and deprives them of their power of resistance as a result of the inertness that develops in the souls of the oppressed, when laws are enforced by means of punishment, they completely destroy fortitude. So when you're a civic being because of all the fines you have to pay and all the, then you have been reduced of this quality of fortitude. And this generates a feeling of humiliation. It is no argument against this that the men around Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam observed the religious laws and yet did not experience any diminution of their fortitude, but possessed the greatest possible fortitude. When the Muslims got their deen from the lawgiver, and he talks about the Prophet ﷺ as the lawgiver, the one who established, in the kind of Greek terminology, the one who established the nomos. The restraining influence came from themselves as a result of the encouragement and discouragement he gave them in the Quran. Governmental and educational laws destroy fortitude. So he says governmental and educational laws destroy fortitude because their restraining influence is something that comes from outside. The deen, the religions of the deen, the Sharia on the other hand, do not destroy fortitude because their restraining influence is something inherent. Therefore governmental and educational laws influence Hadari people, weaken their souls and diminish their stamina because they have to suffer their authority both as children and as adults. The Bedou, on the other hand, live far away from the laws of government instruction and education. So already he's kind of seen a mode of being that we would recognize as being statist, being subhuman, and that this is the kind of natural state of the Hadari, that it devolves to that it needs this constant refreshment from the edges. So what? Yes, I will finish here. So the thing that the asabiya, that gives the energizing power to fortitude and courage, and this energy is channeled by leadership, by the and whether prophetic or in the normal case by what Ibn Khaldun designates as royal authority, acquired by force of character and credibility of lineage. then what is kind of created by this asabiya being transformed by leadership is what he designates as superiority. So the people become superior. They are able to overcome people by their presence. So the famous hadith about how the presence of the Prophet ﷺ overcame his enemies to what? Yes, to a month's journey. Yeah. So it's just even even to hear about these people has a power and and overcomes people. And so, in that sense, when the other form of Tao, which you see particularly in Southeast Asia and which I call the mercantile, the presence of the Muslims transformed the people that they came to, and the first people that they transformed, of course, was the kings. So they changed the kings, and then those kings changed their people. So the key to the empowerment of the Bedou and the bringing into being of this new nomos, which Islam is the epitome of, is the emergence of the galvanizing royal authority, which we could call the Amir, the prince. And this prince, there's a little book that Sheikh Makaba wrote called The Muslim Prince, which is very small but has so much depth in it. It's like and so I want to finish this part of the presentation with a poem. And actually, I wrote this poem, so please excuse. But it's me expressing what I'm trying to say, and sometimes poetry is, as we will see in the second part of the presentation, is maybe the most powerful way of expressing it. No, the seer said, I am not searching out the mannerly prince with a common touch, well fed, well scrubbed, well shod, well versed in the etiquette of the times, well prepared to take his appointed place with his retinue and rents. No, I keep my hopes on the horizon, waiting for the stranger from the wild places, with wildness in his heart, and strength in his sinews, tempered by test and task, bringing his band of dust-shod companions to stand with him, whatever the cost. I send out envoys to seek him, and ask after him from the travellers, spread the news of his coming, and prepare his place. Yes, the seer said, he will come. He is searching for me. So that's the end of the kind of the formal presentation. So I'm hoping that kind of helped to establish a kind of an Islamic kind of vocabulary, which probably is not common. I think Ibn Khaldun, people know about him, but they don't really use him. And I think he's a really useful kind of point of reference. And so I hope that hasn't been too boring. And is any questions about it? Yes.
Sorry for not attending your whole lecture. I had some other issues to sort out. There was something I heard when I was here that I found quite interesting. You referred to the Arabs prior to the arrival of the Messenger as having fitra. They didn't have the deen.
Yeah.
I think there might well be a misunderstanding surrounding this word fitra. So presumably, from what you said, one can be in a state of fitra, but in a state of jahiliyyah, ignorance. And how does that correlate to the understanding of deen is it deen al-fitra or deen al-fitra?
Yeah.
How does that all add up? Because I thought fitra in itself was something that was, in effect, natural.
Yeah. Okay. There's one misunderstanding which I think needs to be cleared up, which is when people say, "Oh, every child is born a Muslim," that actually isn't true. You know, the hadith says every child is born on the fitra, right? And then, you know, so every child is born like the kind of seed with its full potential, and because as the hadith goes on, like, you know, you see the kind of, you know, the animal, does it give birth? You know, there's no defect in the kind of, and then we know that Islam is the way which keeps people on that kind of on that pure nature, yes. And so when the person becomes, because in a way you don't have Islam until you become mukhalaf. So your Islam begins at the age of puberty, normally 14, and that's actually going to be very important in the second part of the talk, that, you know, talking about when people become mukhalaf and therefore taking on the deen for themselves, because that is a significant step in the development of the human being and in the education of the human being. What Ibn Khaldun says is that it's natural for mankind to live both in the kind of you know, the places outside of the city, and therefore we're talking about like the hinterland of the city and the wild places, and it's also talking about the city itself is the natural environment for the human being, for the modern human being. So he says, you know, the fitra, which is established by Sayyidina Ibrahim, you know, has this balance between the city and the kind of the wild places. So he said both groups are fitri. So, but the fitra becomes one aspect of the fitra, which, you know, the commentator will say, is that this means natural belief, but it's beyond just natural belief. It's also, there's a natural patterning to human existence. So the fact that the Bedouin, you know, living in the kind of a natural environment has this, you know, connection to fitra. So I'm not talking in the terms of belief. I'm talking in terms of the kind of the social pattern. Where that, you know, Ibn Khaldun talks about fitri as a social patterning, not as a kind of belief system. But the modern Muslims have taken fitra to be purely a belief system, and it's not. It's something, and you don't. That's why you don't get that kind of real understanding of what the word millah means, actually. I hope that's kind of clarified a little bit.
So it does. And for us who are in the business of wanting to find an educational modality that really does renew the healthy patterning of young people and all people, is that if we can capture within ourselves something of the importance of it, and not to, because I mean, as you said earlier, everybody's heard of Ibn Khaldun, but in sense something that is put up there, something that, oh, you have to be really educated, you have to be a historian, you have to be an anthropologist, you have to be a sociologist to really get it. But that is not true, and that's a lie which makes him distant. Whereas in fact, to make him, to be able to put him in front of young, energetic people who are wild, or they would be wild if they weren't overeducated in schools, then they'd see instantly. I mean, and that becomes something of a gift to them, which we owe to them, as well as to ourselves.
Okay. Yep. Yes, sir.
Just on the point about Ibn Khaldun, I was just wanted your comments on something that I read a book a couple of years ago which is called Southern Theory, and the idea behind this book is that it looked at sociological theory or research approaches which were non-Western, and it began by arguing that the whole concept of research itself is part of the colonial process and is a westernized way of understanding and dominating the world. So anthropology is sort of tied in with the Western civilization. And then it goes through a range of non-Western approaches to sociology. It talks about Africa and in South America, Paulo Freire and so on. There's a chapter in the book about Islam, and it talks about Ibn Khaldun, it talks about people like Shariati in Iran and so on. And the author makes a comment which just sort of stayed with me, and what the author states is that for Muslims who are trying to revive an Islamic tradition of understanding society, understanding sociology, not looking at it through the Western lens, trying to do it from the worldview of Islam, and she's not a Muslim, this author, is that it's not helpful to go back to Ibn Khaldun because there's been such a gap since that time and now, and so much has happened and so on. So there needs to be something other than that. And what's your take on that? Because your presentation has essentially been about, okay, that's the starting point to try and understand what society is. So just wondering what you thought of that.
Yeah, I think so, because I came back to kind of Ibn Khaldun basically through Sheikh al-Qadr. And in his kind of application of Ibn Khaldun's kind of theory, he first of all, he does a whole analysis of European history. So he doesn't apply the kind of the principles that Ibn Khaldun uncovers about Islamic society. He takes it out of that framework and he puts it into kind of deconstructing the history of Europe and the rise of modernity and things like that. So already the thing that made Ibn Khaldun sort of interesting to me wasn't kind of about Islam per se. It was about kind of looking at the nature of the human situation, which of course is a universal thing. So I think there is a kind of a universality of approach in the Ibn Khaldun that you can go to, jump over the centuries to, and I immediately kind of see, okay, right, I can extend this kind of term dawah, and I can get a broader understanding of it. I can understand the word dynasty, and I get a broad understanding. I can see the potential to fill in those gaps very quickly, even by myself, let alone kind of with a group of people kind of working consistently, trying to create what I would call like a neo-Khaldunian kind of corpus of sociological approach, which, as far as I can see, hasn't really been done, or it's only been kind of approached at. So I think there's kind of I don't think it's remote. I think it's kind of he gets to the core of things very quickly, and I think hopefully we can see in the kind of extending it to kind of educational practice that it can have a resonance very quickly for us as well. So can I use that as a kind of impetus to kind of just look at things a bit more kind of dynamically?
Can I pick up on that particular point, Sheikh? Going back to that question, what struck me was when you were talking about periphery, and how
well, I think I
always
exactly
that there is always a revitalisation of the centre to the periphery, and in one sense, we're sitting in the periphery. I mean, we were just talking at break, and I can remember so many education conferences that I've been to where we actually haven't been discussing these intellectual ideas, what we were this morning. And there's a tendency of educators, maybe Islamic educators, or to create an Islamic school. I mean, that's what there's so many Islamic trusts out there with so many schools and so many buildings trying to create a centre themselves, whereas this is really quite incredible when you look at it, that if we do something quality, even if it's periphery, maybe it might be in Norwich or Bradford or whatever, that can eventually go and influence everything else. So it has a huge, I think, bearing for me, just listening to that sort of a theory, and it revitalises yourself as well, if you sort of pardon the pun. And the other thing is, it's really interesting about, you know, how relevant 14th century or 15th century sociologists are. When the Sheikh was talking about the difference between the Bedu and the Hazari, the sedentary, you mentioned that the Bedu had less nerves, you know, more courage, protect themselves, weapons, self-reliance. I'm just thinking of the gypsies I know, you know, who just live not far from where we are.
Exactly. Well, maybe you know, we're not making dawah to the right people. Maybe I mean, there's a line here which I think I cut out from the but it says, you know, although the world of postmodernity is described as a global village, so you know, we think we live in this global village. There are many edges, many peripheries. There's all kinds of sort of little spaces, and really in terms of you know, looking for the place where that kind of seed of transformation can be planted, there are no-go zones. I mean, in many of the kind of third world countries in the shantytown, they're complete no-go zones. I mean, you know, the people are, you know, they're contained, you know, by the kind of the wider society, but sometimes, you know, hardly contained. But there's a freedom by their kind of situation, and the Prophet ﷺ said, you know, look for me amongst the masakin, look about you know, the people who are miskeen. And
come back to what you're saying about the reservoirs. It's looking for the reservoirs.
Yes.
It's not so much a peripheral thing, but there are reservoirs which can be activated, and once they're activated, then something extraordinary is unleashed.
Yeah, obviously there's not reservoirs in terms of sort of huge, you know, groups of people like the Turks and the Arabs and the kind of but the dispossessed, the Paulo, like is even huger. I mean, you know, the majority of mankind lives on less than kind of, you know, $2 a day or whatever. You know, we can, as Ibrahim sort of said when we were looking at this kind of, you know, rosy picture of that's not the experience of the kind of the most of humanity.
I mean, it's really interesting that you know, when you look at, you know, contemporary situation of the Muslims and how, you know, we seem to be so from all sides. I mean, perhaps, was it worse in the time of the Mamluks? And you know, Sultan Baybars was a Mamluk. You know, he was of a servant class. And they were the only ones, the first ones to destroy the Mongols, and also, you know, the Crusaders as well. You know, made it such that the Crusaders never came in, and it's maybe we are looking in the wrong place, like you said, Sheikh.
But just going back to what I said in the beginning, and we were referring to Goethe. In fact, we're saying that the whole of Europe is a reservoir, which is on the point of being, you know, set alight, if you like. It's which is a very interesting thing to grasp. I mean, we wouldn't think of it that way because, you know, we think in terms of sedentary and all the rest of it. But in fact, it's ready. It's a body, this huge body of people who are the next reservoir. And if we find ourselves, that's where we find ourselves now, then we give a whole new meaning to our presence and what our priorities ought to be.
So, but that, you know, what will galvanise the situation is the emergence of leadership. So I'm now sort of putting the term of reference back to young men, and you know, I think the way to kind of start with that, of course, is to go back to the famous hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or some people say Omar, some people say Ali, that when they were asked about bringing up young people, they said, play with them for 7, teach them for 7, and keep company with them for 7. So the modality of education for the emerging young adult from the age 14 to 21 is keeping company. So we, looking at that terms, that whatever the kind of tools of education that are given in that period of teaching there. So in a sense, that would change in different situations. But in our situation, we would look upon literacy and numeracy really, that they should be firmly grasped by the age that 14. So they're not bothering about that. So then beyond that, then the educational process is contextualized within the within the community, so that the emerging young man gets the picture of what it is to be an adult by keeping company with other adults, and they are committed to his developing as a human being. But what do you develop? You develop character. So we go back to this picture that I've given with Ibn Khaldun about why was it that the Arabs were a suitable group that the Prophet should be placed upon him, and I introduced the term Muru'a. And Muru'a specifically was the kind of the code of manliness. But the Muru'a leads to something which we call akhlaq. So the goal of all these particular kind of things that you have in your kind of Muru'a. So I'll go through the list of what people categorize as what Muru'a is. Shall I write them down? It'd probably be a good thing to write them down because it's very important. Where's my... I don't know where I've got to. So the first is patience in misfortune. The second pillar is the protection. Persistence in revenge. Which really is the demand for justice, because you have to remember that Muru'a exists where there isn't a state. So justice is not meted out except by revenge. In that way isn't personal revenge. It's kind of putting right of wrong. It's kind of and the way in which they. So you had to absolutely insist that things were put right in that. The third one is protection of the weak. I hope my writing's okay. The fourth is, this is so important, defiance of the strong. Or defiance towards the strong. And it actually still persists in the Bedou. I mean, I had a wonderful kind of encounter with a because you still find, if you go to the Arabian Peninsula, people who are Bedou, and I met this man who was the epitome of Bedouiness. He had upright in his bearing, and I met him, and I kind of bowed my head like as you do, like sort of being kind of. He looked at me and said, "Muslims don't bow their heads to anybody." He said, "When you greet somebody, keep your back straight and look them in the eye." And I thought, I never enjoyed being rebuked more than that. So defiance towards the strong. It was very funny because I was relating this story to one of our brothers who's been living in Japan, and he said if you did that to the Japanese, they'd run away because they can't look you in the eye. So if they became Muslim, they'd have to change that aspect of their own. I mean, Yes, hospitality to the visitor. They're all obvious, aren't they? 6. The generosity to the poor. My writing is so bad. And loyal, yeah, 7 and 8. There's loyalty. I'm not going to write that. Loyalty to the tribe, and fidelity, like keeping your promises. Like if you make a promise, you will die rather than not keep your promise. So keeping promises.
You just described the Futuwwa.
And you don't. It's not just the Arabs that have it. The Futuwwa, every people have this kind of. Every tribe has a Muru'a. But I mean, the Arabs. I say Allah chose them particularly because it was particularly strong. But how is this imbued? How was the Muru'a transmitted? What was the education process by which this was kind of instilled into the young man amongst the Arabs?
I've been sent out.
Something I did it. Hopefully I was trying. Wait, it was poetry, and storytelling. So part of this kind of having good manners was also being eloquent as well. So it's all bound together by the kind of by the poetry. And it's very interesting that an alternate word for akhlaq is adab. And of course in Arabic, adab and is both good manners and literature. Okay, so as we looked with the kind of Ibn Khaldun, he saw that asabiyya becomes purified by ikhwa. So Muru'a becomes purified to akhlaq. No, they had akhlaq. What is the famous hadith? Yeah. Or there's bu'ithtu. The one I've got written down is bu'ithtu lil utamimma husn al akhlaq. So it's a very interesting in the Arabic because it's not arsala, it's bu'ithtu. It's the sense of being delegated. The Prophet ﷺ has been delegated. He's been sent as as Allah's to make tamam. Tamam means something which is completed and perfected. So it's the completion, the filling. So they had akhlaq, but it's completed and filled by the example of the Prophet. What is a transformational quality that changes it from being tribal Muru'a to all the things that we do with akhlaq? I mean, I think there's this one simple word. It's taqwa. All the things that are clustered around taqwa, that you're doing it fi sabilillah, that is the transformation. You stop doing it for any other reason, and then the behavior becomes akhlaq. It becomes the things that every Muslim aspires to. So the Muslims have a code which is not mentioned in the hadith or the thing. Well, became to be known as Futuwwa. So Futuwwa is all of these things transformed by taqwa in order to have akhlaq. And of course, so why do we use the word Futuwwa? Because what is the root of the word Futuwwa?
Young man.
is the word is fatah, a young man. And the example of the fatah which is given to us repeatedly in the Quran is Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. So as these, see, there was no formalization of Futuwwa in the time of the Sahaba, but then in the way that the Muslim Ummah developed, various groups of people became concerned about this preserving of the taqwa. So it took place within the kind of the Sufis. So the Sufis then developed a kind of an understanding of Futuwwa. They kind of, it's like even like the word, there was no terminology of Sufism with the Sahaba, but then it became a kind of a terminology, and we had that with lots of the terminology of Islam. So the word Futuwwa emerged in very quickly. So you have your famous the first kind of Sufi text about Futuwwa of As-Sulami. This is in the end of the 3rd century. So spontaneously in the Muslim Ummah came this idea of Futuwwa and the development of the character of the young man, and it was by informal processes, and then those informal processes became more and more formal, and you had kind of both kind of formal processes of, in fact, Sufism becoming kind of into tariqas, and the tariqas kind of back associating to themselves kind of silsilas, which really, in a way, they did exist, but they didn't kind of exist. There's a sort of formalization, and then it also became associated with groups of people that work together. So the guilds also developed a concept of Futuwwa, and it became a kind of very sort of widespread movement. And then to show you how the thing kind of things evolve organically and then they become statist, the Abbasid Khalif in Baghdad, Nasr al-Din Allah, whose period of rule was, or actually maybe his life, it was 1180 in Christian dating to 1225, he declared himself the head of all the Futuwwa lodges in across the Muslim world. He said, okay, so that was, in one sense, the kind of the death of them at that point. They did revive. So when the Ottomans developed their dawla, then very soon in the kind of the places under their domination, there became the movement of the people called the Akhis, who were a Futuwwa group, and they were groups of young men. Now, what I wanted to kind of look at, though, is what does this mean to us in terms of the education of young men? Is that the most important thing is the establishment of good character. Information and all these other skills are purely kind of secondary things, and we've identified that Futuwwa recognized that this moulding of the character happened at a particular time, and it happened by a particular process, which was keeping company, and that the age of the fatah is 14 to 21. If we're looking at it with the idea of these 3 sevens, and therefore the education of young men is vital to the whole ethic of society. I mean, there's a similar. I'm not the processes that are happening with young women. Actually, as we can see in our own society, the women are far better at transmitting that kind of ethic and continuity. I mean, the men have difficulty with it. So, but at the same time as being an ethical code, we have the sense of Sayyidina Ibrahim being the model for the fitra. So as we can see in the world today, I mean, like, we have, in fact, maybe an over-refined understanding of Islam. I mean, if we look at Islam as the seed, then the seed is complete. It's kind of, and actually kind of learning, the information about Islam can be done pretty quickly. Obviously, you develop, but the core matter of it, you can do it within, weeks, quite frankly. But it has to be planted into the milital fitra. So what the Muslims in our age have lost is this sense of naturalness. They've lost that core kind of regenerative energy that makes the Islam vital. And then when we see that that has to do with the recapturing of the groupness and making sure that the groupness doesn't kind of devolve into kind of factionism and tribalism, but remains kind of dynamic in the way that you have put forward by Ibn Khaldun. But in our own kind of situation, I think that there's an importance of connecting the young people of this age to the fitra. Now, as I said in the pattern of Sayyidina Ibrahim, I noticed that there was the city, and then there was the hinterland of the city, and then there was the kind of the wild places beyond it. And that an aspect of the human being is fitri in all of those things. So that the traditional city is a natural human environment. I mean, the modern city has ceased to be that. So there's connecting young people to those kind of organic principles of the traditional city. We have to finish in 5 minutes. Okay. So they need to kind of connect to that, and I always took young people to the centre of Norwich to show them what the traditional city was, because in the centre of Norwich is the marketplace. And you stand in the marketplace and you look at the hill and you see the castle. And you look to the left and you see the spire of the cathedral. And then right next to the marketplace you've got the guild hall. So you've got all these kind of civic processes by which you participate in the kind of, but at the same time you define you as a kind of a worshipping human being. And authority is the castle and the guild, which is not, because if you turned your back, you actually go to this monstrous thing that they got now, which is the city hall, the town hall, which is like a neo-fascist kind of building, really massive, ugly thing, and it's got
Hitler's favourite building in the United Kingdom.
Apparently, was it Hitler's? It was. Is that true? Or you were just inventing that?
No, I was told.
I think Mussolini was really impressed.
So, and then you've got this hinterland, which is the kind of agrarian, and basically it's man's relation to plants and to animals. So all of us need a direct relationship to the food that we eat, and with the animals, it's not just the kind of the eating of the animals; it's also the kind of the training of the animals. So the riding, the looking after the hunting dog, or whatever. That aspect of human being has to be developed and expressed. And then the wild places is if you look in the lives of the prophets, it had really two functions. One was it's the place where you go to reflect on the nature of existence, to be away from everything. So Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, he went to the outside, and he saw the stars, and he saw the kind of the moon and the sun. That that experience, that kind of reflection that comes from being in the wild places. and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, obviously, when he went to the cave in Hira, that's the same thing. So that's kind of an aspect of the human being. And then the second one is the journey. That all of the Sayyidina Ibrahim obviously journeyed from Iraq to or down to Hijaz. So that empty space is also a kind of the journey, and part of our experience of Islam is the Hajj, and the Hajj really should give people that kind of experience that's deprived from us. So I think it's really important for young men, and I'm not, and I think a whole other talk needs to be given about the kind of about the ird. Am I pronouncing that right? The kind of the honour for young women. What would you? Yeah, what? Ird. Okay. Yes. So, Ajami mangling of. But, so this is how. But the other thing is that we have to create the experience of community. So, yeah, so, and that is not a kind of a theoretical one. It can only emerge from, and if you look at the kind of traditional societies, then that kind of sense of belonging to a particular group was at every kind of level of the society. So in the terms of this process, you create kind of a group culture. You create groups of young men, obviously groups of young women, and then you create a kind of a bond with them, which I'm sure Hajja Fatima can tell us about how that happens with the young women that you kind of take on your things. So that's really the kind of what I don't know why I've not done it yet. May Allah give me the means to turn this from a theory into a practice, inshallah. Yes.
I was going to say, I think there is a lack of people that young men can look up to and say, they make them feel free and feel confident. It's not. I think they struggle to find that personality that makes them feel like leaders.
Yeah.
But there are some, obviously, people like Nietzsche who encourage men to be free, who encourage them to be confident, who encourage them to be essentially real. But I think they're few and far between. But we must hold on to the ones that are there and to use them as a platform to which young men can grow. And Sheikh Al-Bukhari also encourages young men to be free as well. He encourages the leadership, the certainty, the emirs and the mosques. He wants organisation, and that comes through teaching young men how to be men, and how to grow to be not just that but confident. And I think that's something in Britain which is quite difficult to find. So when we have found it, we have to recognise it as something valuable and say this is something which we need to work with, rather than just seeing it as a theory or an idea of being free and confident. We should see it as something real and progressive.
I think one thing which I just wanted to just re-emphasise is that in that process with the young men, the aspect of storytelling and poetry is really important. So those stories become stories of heroism, and yes.
it's mainly just like it's something we brought up with since we born. It's just because you can see it with your uncle, you can see it with your dad, you can see it from the family around you. And when you're doing something wrong, it's just like you see the condemn of the whole community about this thing. So you brought up with this Futuwwa and Muru'a because it's something embedded from young age. And in here, in this country, it's really hard to find. And I found it really difficult to teach it to the children in the class, where you keep telling them, and they were just looking at you, what are you talking about? And just like, and then the problem, you can't have a leader whether you don't have this. And just like, so you have to bring this up by the young age, just like by teaching by leading and practice. And they see these people and then learn from them, and then the whole community, everybody, just like really emphasizing on these things, because this is the main base of the Muslims. Without them, there's no Muslims.
Sorry. I think the point you made earlier on about women being better at this than men, the transmission through the generations, is because women still function within the home, which Muslims still have some semblance of control over, whereas men function in the public sphere, and the public sphere is no longer the natural city or the hinterlands or anything like that. The public sphere is entirely different, and that becomes a huge, huge challenge because
it's been domesticated.
Yeah. But the challenge is that community space, although we've got massages everywhere, the community space isn't there for the young men to be part of this jama'ah, this group. I mean, I'm not saying we're not trying, but it's missing, and because it's missing, the only solution to this is for the men to take the responsibility on to do that, because the women can't do that.
Exactly.
And that this is a frustration that I hear again and again from mothers, because
just like most of the men, it's like
Yeah.
the zero on the other side. They don't
take it on.
Take anything. It's just like most of the
mean,
men in this country, most of the parents are complaining about
and,
the same
and then
thing.
if the men were taking this on, it would relieve you of so much stress, so much kind of, I mean, you could have time to just be human beings again. I mean, I think women take incredible kind of strain because of
the structure of the working life has had that impact, because the men are at work. It used to be 9 to 5, now it's like 24 hours.
Yeah.
And that even if it's just 9 to 5, by the time they get in the evening, beyond getting to the masjid themselves for the salah, what have they got time to do? And within the next 30 years, you're going to have the same situation for women.
Yeah.
Because the society is changing, and in our generation, so many women are working, and the next generation, it's just a given, because you cannot function. The way the capitalist system has set it up, economically, you can't function unless both parties are working.
Yeah, and there won't be any marriage, and there won't be, So you don't want to kind of project. I mean, science fictions cannot even start to imagine it. I don't know.
On a positive note, I mean, I can remember when we were growing up, elder members in our community used to use the word Jawan Mard. It's a Farsi word, but also used in Urdu, and it was something that you'd aspire to, a Jawan Mard. I think some of you might be familiar. And they used to call it Jawan Mardi. So, for example, you'd help someone, you'd cast your eyes down, you would always be helpful, and you'd always put everyone else's.
Sorry, we call it Rajal.
Right.
That's what we call a man.
Exactly
Otherwise, they are
same,
not men.
Somebody
like this.
That sort of concept.
Rajal.
Yeah, in certain villages and in certain societies, it's still going on.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
I mean, I think, because it does exist within the Muslim community, or the vestiges of it. But the thing that binds the Muslim together is ikhwa. But if we go back to what Allah says about ikhwa in the Quran, there's various ayats, which is, you are not mu'minun until you love Rasulullah more than your family and the whole of mankind. Okay, so that's one condition of ikhwa. You are not mu'minun until you want for your brother what you want for yourself. If you believe in Allah on the last day, you will treat your neighbour with kindness. And remember when the Prophet ﷺ made hijrah to Yathrib, the Muslims were a minority. They were just it didn't happen that the majority of the people in Medina were Muslims until like the last 2 to 3 years of the time there. So the experience of the Prophet, he was, so neighbour meant neighbour. And if you believe in Allah on the last day, you will show hospitality to guests. So I think that the thing that has spoilt that vestige of remaining kind of good behaviour amongst the Muslim community in this country is that they have put up barriers to the rest of society. They have, they've put themselves into ghettos. But I mean, it's obviously going to break down. But let it break down with the kind of with that extension of the dawah of the.
Can I just go back to what was being suggested earlier about men and their situation and what women are now faced with in terms of being forced into the same trap? Is that going back to these qualities of Muru'a? You see, what's still required, even in the times that we're in, is the freedom to do these things, to fulfill these things. And that's what's required of men. Now, the first requirement is freedom to be free, because you can't do any of these things. You cannot look after your neighbour if you're not free to do it. You can't look after anything if you're not free to do it. You can't behave in certain ways without being free to do that. And the first freedom is the freedom to realise that that is actually one's natural form. But then, to then express that form in terms of action, you require freedom. And that requires courage. And so that's the thing that, in fact, we need to generate within ourselves. And but my going back to the women here is how. Be careful. You may get what you say you want. Be careful. You may get a free man. Don't assume that you would know how to live with a free man. A free man is a scary thing. And so don't please. Let's be a little cautious about this. A free man is something that's almost unknown in this society. You don't see them. I suspect if we were to see one, we'd all run, men and women alike. And these are people who have these qualities and are not afraid of anything except free women.
I think something, I really like your lecture because it points so much towards solutions. But I think what we've identified is that many of the people we're directing this to don't think they have to change. You don't realise the severity of the situation. Ibrahim's talk was interesting because it was very much about looking at the state of things and how they are now, and identifying things through European knowledge of dissecting and working out what's actually going on. And your lecture is again about looking at, once you understand that, this is where we go. And it's something quite, I think really, the word you've used before me is churning. People have to be churned up. And it's something about when you word things in the right way to people, they realise, they need to change, Again, just following on what I asked last time regarding people having fitra but not having Islam. I think the thing I'm taking from it, and certainly I'm being churned up by it, really, is the idea that you can have Islam but not have fitra. And this is quite, we should all be sort of shaking in our boots with this thing, because people, we've somehow become this unnatural Muslims. We're like, we're as Ibrahim said himself, we're viewing things in an inflamed manner. So we've got,
it's platonic.
It's platonic. It's like it's intellectual Islam that, we're basically, non-Muslims are looking at us and thinking we're robots. And why on earth would I want to become like these people? They are, non-Muslims are attracted by fitra. But there isn't any fitra in Muslims. It's not anything, it's human. It's all it's processes and rules. And, Emir Khan posting a photograph of his wife on Facebook without covering her head, and all he's getting is Muslims saying she's a Muslim, she needs to cover her head, and this is what and non-Muslims are looking at this and laughing their heads off. And you see, this is the kind of we've got to have a reality check. Muslim men and women, and Muslim women are no different. They're falling in, they've got more of an opportunity to find this fitra and understand these things, but are quickly giving it up to fall in line with this inflamed Islam that is devoid of fitra. So this is something we need to be sort of grabbed by the collar in some way.
I think
maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. This is just what I'm taking.
If we're looking at it in terms of young men, and you see what they're actually doing, on their kind of the quality of what they think is enjoying themselves is so meager. Yeah. I just think if you just get them out and about and just doing things which are really resonating in this kind of way which I sort of projecting, I just think they'll just enjoy themselves. They'll just, they'll just, it'd be like, from being kind of cramped up in front of your kind of mobile phone, just filling the space and kind of, just breathing, and that, will be part of the change for the human being. Is just that. It's just, it's not what we're thinking about and what we, as Ibrahim is, just the activity itself changes us.
But they can't find that.
Sorry.
Could you give us some practical examples of such activities? Like, what is it that could?
Well, I mean, obviously, I could work from the kind of the outside to the inside, because you need to get people out beyond their normal environments. So in a sense, the wild places are taking people beyond what they're used to, and giving them. And so the way that you do that for us would be to give them the sense of a journey, and hopefully, as you do that, then you allow them that reflection. So taking young people out into the countryside, or but the wild places, but not just the way that people do it now, so they can do all these kind of activities, but do it in a way which enables them to tell stories about it, and to express it, and to take a meaning from it. So you would have that kind of activities in the wild places, but I think the one in the kind of immediate hinterland is kind of just everybody needs to grow something. Everybody needs to have understanding that everybody needs to have a kind of an interaction with animals. So you have to encourage. I mean, young Muslims in this country don't have any experience of none of them have dogs or cats or horses or
over the last 5 or 6, 7 years. I mean, when we were young, you could go to Pakistan or India or Bangladesh or wherever for
and taste the village life.
Yeah. Now you can't take 2 days off without the government slapping a fine on them. Yeah. So it's getting worse, isn't it?
And then but there's a whole kind of meaning that you get from that kind of interaction with the plants and the animals, about the kind of ecology of the planet, and so you would also kind of in a way politicize them by that process as well. But I think the most important one is really like, how do you regenerate the kind of the civic, the kind of how do you make people in a way, because the traditional city is based on the neighbourhood, so you have to kind of get the young people to realise that there is a neighbourhood. There was a wonderful project that was done by Ayman Abdelkader in Birmingham called Clean Up Medina. I don't know where he got the kind of the local Muslims going around cleaning up the streets of their district, and it was. And it totally changed their kind of, their idea of themselves.
We had a sort of this year where the children that are mostly in our school are between 3 and 10, but we had some boys who were a little bit older, they were between sort of 9 and 14, and one of the brothers that I know, he was a science teacher at school, so he left his job and he set up a sort of homeschooling initiative with them, with just these 6 boys, and he did exactly that. He's quite a good hunter, bows and arrows, shooting. He took them a lot to countryside, they went camping a lot, swimming, archery.
I mean, there are also the physical activities which are the swimming, the horse riding, and the archery.
And then in his backyard, I mean, this is only like barking, but in his backyard, he's got a little farm going, quails and ducks and chickens and fish. He was breeding fish, and he had this whole hydroponics thing going. He's really quite a
Sounds like
a great guy.
We should be here. We should be giving us the
come, you can see it. But I think even with those boys that he had under his wing, and though he trained them hard, I think he really found that the sort of social media and like the greater kind of community that we're in just infiltrated too much, and he really feels like he can't get to where he wants them to be as young men.
Right, he's not making headway with them on that.
I think he feels that he is. There's 2 of them. There's him and another guy who assists him, and he does feel like he's getting somewhere. But his own son is he's about 8 now, and he's wondering whether he should put him in that environment with these older boys, because I think he just feels like there's so much damage that's caused by a lot of this.
You mean like putting with the peer pressure is so.
Peer
therefore, you have to get the
is
balance
so
right. I mean, like if you're doing these activities, you have to make sure that you've got a good group of kind of men.
Yeah, but then they still go home. They still have their families, the extended family and friends around them.
So it's not just the boys that need to be doing this; it's also the men. But actually, one thing which I
see Mohammed wanted to say something brief, I think.
Me gustaría decir que el mundo de la educación a nivel mundial
I would like to say that education, worldwide,
está completamente feminizado.
Is feminized. It's really feminized.
La sociabilidad del niño es diferente a la de la niña.
Sociability of boys is different than girls.
Los ritmos de aprendizaje igualmente.
Learning rhythms are different.
El resultado es en la escuela mixta coeducativa.
So co-education, mixed education,
es el fracaso de los niños.
Destruction of the children.
Yeah.
Y la no educación de su masculinidad.
And the non-education of the masculinity mainliness.
La primera medida para educar a la masculinidad en los niños y en los jóvenes es la separación.
First thing to educate mainliness in boys is to separate.
En nuestro proyecto en Granada,
project in Granada,
tenemos escuela de chicos y escuela de chicas.
We have, inshallah, boys school and girls school.
Estudiamos fuertemente todo este asunto.
We studied all of this matter firmly and deeply.
Desde la arquitectura, la duración de las clases,
from architecture and the length of the times of the lessons.
Completamente adaptado a la forma en cómo un niño aprende.
Adapted everything to how a boy learns.
Y estoy totalmente de acuerdo con Idris que no puedes educar a un hombre, no puedes hacer un hombre, tienes que hacer hombres.
And I agree with Idris that you cannot create a man, you have to create men.
Alejandro Magno es el fruto de Aristóteles.
Alexander Magnus?
Great. Alexander.
Is
es el fruto de Aristóteles, de la
filosofía
de Aristóteles. Pero cuando Alejandro Magno era niño y pasó a la edad de dejaba digamos el proceso o la parte de la madre,
when he was a kid, and he left behind the process of the
donde
time
Filipo,
of his
donde
mother.
Filipo, su padre, no se metió, dejó completamente a Alejandro con su madre.
When the father didn't get involved, he left it with.
Cuando llegó el momento, creó una ciudad, llevó a Alejandro con Aristóteles y toda una generación, todo un grupo de jóvenes con él.
When the moment came, he took Alexander, put it in a new city, and a group of other men surrounding him.
The groupness is.
The groupness is crucial.
And when inshallah we create that, then maybe we will get the princes will come.
Yeah,
I feel one thing that would be very good for the Muslim boys is that instead of playing football, they played rugby.
Yeah.
That would change so. It would change so because rugby develops a fortitude and a kind of and a kind of cooperation. I mean, there are different players in a kind of in a football team. The defenders, but they're pretty much the same. But in a kind of rugby team, there's all kinds of different kind of roles. Everybody has to kind of cooperate. Like the guy who's the hooker. He's a certain kind of person, and it gives.
¿Puedo completar un poco?
Just to finish.
Sí, finish. La educación de los niños se hace en la competencia.
Boys' educations, it runs in competition.
Los niños están juntos y ríen y pelean.
Boys, they're together, they laugh and they fight.
Y mientras las escuelas intentan que todos estén
In
juntos
schools, they try that.
y sean tolerantes y pacíficos.
They try all of them to be tolerant, pacific,
Y están
peaceful,
destruyendo toda su energía.
destroy their energy.
Lo único que el maestro tiene que hacer es tomar esa energía de la competencia agonal, de la lucha, de la arena,
The teacher has to take all of this energy of fight
y encauzarla en la nobleza,
and take it to nobility.
pero no lo puedes
Suppress it.
You cannot cover it.
no lo puedes cubrir, tienes que dejarte salvar.
It has to flourish.
Which is what Ibn Khaldun recognized.
There's no doubt, boys have to be educated boys.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
And we all know that. But if we looked at the kind of the Muslim boys' secondary schools, and we look at the Darul Ulooms, we see a lot of passive boys, I'm afraid. So this hope of
I know we're probably running out of time, but I need to be very urgent to say one thing, which is that the basis for all of this, any of it, from the example you gave, to what we're touching on now, is that the environment for it has to exist. There has to be in existence men who are already gathered, otherwise there's no environment. The men have to have the courage to create the space, occupy it, and gather there. That is the initial and necessary condition. Without it, it still remains theory. You get one man trying to do it with one other man, and really his priority at that point should be, where can I find other men to do this thing? Because you can't do it by yourself, no matter how clever you are, no matter how many skills you have personally. If it's not being spread out, and if it doesn't exist in that gathering of men, then we can't do any of it. And so that becomes the first priority. That group of men, like these ones described by Ibn Khaldun, who come from the periphery and say, we need this space, there is us, there's already an usness that exists. And that usness is powerful. And it creates space. And then the boys who enter into that space, as well as the women who get a sense by, if you like, almost by opposition as to what they are, if that doesn't exist, then none of it can work. And that's really my understanding. If men don't do that, then what we'll end up doing, we'll cheat. We'll say, well, let's build an Islamic school instead. Or I'm good at archery, I'll teach my boy how to fire arrows. It doesn't do anything. It crushes the child in fact. So that environment of men has to exist. and if we can't create it as men, then Allah will replace us with men who can do it. And
unfortunately, may Allah protect
or who
us.
will do it. Yeah.
So I think we've time to finish.
May
Allah bring revival to the Muslim Ummah and protect our young people and make them fulfill our hopes and expectations for them, inshallah.